Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. You know, I'd like to encourage our listeners to sit back and enjoy, because today will be a special conversation with a very special guest. Our most delightful guest, Judy Gaman, is here to talk with us about the subjects of friendship and the power of perspective, lessons she learned from her friendship with a woman over 100 years old. She has a most engaging book on their friendship titled Love, Life, and Lucille, Lessons from a Centenarian. Judy's view on friendships are fresh, they're powerful, and there's lessons for all of us. I'm so looking forward to our discussion because Judy is a highly accomplished author, radio show host, podcaster, and has worked for more than 25 years in the healthcare industry, most recently as the CEO of Executive Medicine in Texas. Today will be just about a couple of lessons that Judy learned from 103-year-old Lucille, and I'm anxious to bring her on the air. So let's get to it. Judy Gaman, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. It's such a pleasure. You have such a great and engaging show, and you know, when you get offered an interview on a show like yours, you take it. So thank you so much.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. I'm going to use that for my for advertising.
There you go. I'll let you.
Thank you. So Judy, tell me, you did a project where you started interviewing centenarians, and for people that doesn't ring a bell, that's for people over 100 years old. Can you tell me about that project? What was your goals in it? What got you into that?
Yeah, sure. Before I was the CEO at Executive Medicine of Texas, I was the Director of Business Development. As part of my duties, I worked on several projects with the physician founders, and one of those was a book called Age to Perfection, How to Thrive to 100 Happy, Healthy Lives. And, you know, when I first got into that, it really was more about, okay, what does the research tell us? I was looking at things like the blue zones. Those are areas in the world where people live very well into their 90s and well over 100 and are still very healthy. And pretty soon, you know, there was just a lot of good science there, a lot of history, and a lot of good information, but it just seemed to be lacking something. And then I had, an epiphany. It was, why don't I just ask the people over 100 how they did this? And so that's what I did. I set out to interview people that had been there, done that, got the T-shirt. And one of those people that I interviewed was Lucille Fleming, and I met her just days after she turned 100. And I have to tell you, it was really a serendipitous moment. It was life-changing. And it was the friendship that everybody wishes they had, but I didn't even know could exist until I met Lucille.
Tell me about Lucille. What made that friendship so special for you?
I think when you meet somebody that you are just so interested in their life, and they're interested in your life, and you're interested in doing life together, and you see value in spending time with them, it's really easy to be friends because you just see an innate value in each other. And I think that was it with Lucille. I mean, she was such a character. Everywhere we went, and we hung out for almost 4 years, and everywhere we went, she lit up the room. People had this incredible attraction to her, and it wasn't because she looked old. It was because she just put off this wonderful energy of just being positive and vibrant, and the way she walked with her shoulders back, and it was like something you just hadn't ever seen before, and you could feel the positiveness, just feel it when she entered the room.
That's incredible. You know, you have said that centenarians have told you that generally agree that friendships are one of the most important keys to a long life. I find that very interesting, especially since I'm an introvert. It kind of scares me a bit. So tell me what is it about friendships and long life?
Well, when I was working on the Age of Perfection book, and I asked these people over 100, give me your top 10 across the board, have a lot of friends was on it. The really unique part of that is I also went into a classroom of grade school kids and asked them, what do you think it would take to live to be 100? And on their list across the board was, you got to have a lot of friends. And so I think we know that. We're born knowing the importance of friendship. But somewhere along the line, we get busy and things happen in our life, and maybe we have kids or we're tied to our career, whatever is happening. We don't really focus on making sure that we have friends, that we're maintaining our friendships. That means being a good friend and also letting other people be a good friend to you. And part of what we really need to fix in our society is that friendship has taken on a whole new meaning. And it's an empty meaning. We look at social media, we look at some of the ways we describe a friend, and I can't say this enough. A friend isn't somebody who just gives you a thumbs up or a heart on something you put on social media. And I don't discount that is a good way to stay connected with some of your acquaintances. But the friends are the people that you do life with. And we need to be doing life with people.
Several decades ago, I heard a speech by Bill Hybels at Willow Creek Church when he had just started Willow Creek Church, and he defined had us create a 3-column list, and there were VDPs, neutral, and replenishing. And he said there's 3 kinds of relationships in your life. The first are the VDPs, which are very draining people. And he had us make a list of the draining people in our life. And then there are the neutral relationships, your acquaintances, the people you know at work and in your various encounters, but you don't hang out with them. But the place that is really critical is that replenishing relationship, that both of you feel replenished after being together. There's just something about being together that excites the soul, and that sounds like the kind of friendship that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And I love what you just said, and I love that he was teaching that. I've never heard that concept before, of making that list and really columnizing where people fit into your life. Wow, that is so powerful. People should be doing this, because sometimes we get really in almost a codependent relationship with those same people that drain our life.
Oh my, yeah.
And it just takes you down this road where you can't figure out, why am I depressed? Everything in my life is great, but I just feel so depressed and so exhausted. And if you look at kind of what you described, I bet if people are feeling depressed or sad or drained, or they've gotten their joy is gone, they've gotten to a point where they just can't really see life the way they used to, I bet anything, if they do what you just said, they go in that VDP column and they'd realize they have too many people in that column, or they spend too much time with people in that column.
Yes.
I just love what you said. I just think that's spot on for today's conversation.
When I did that, what was interesting, and that was back in the 80s, and for about half a decade in the 80s, I was a minister at a large church, like 15,000 people, and my ministry was for single adults in their 30s, and they were kind of depressed because they weren't married, so there was just a boatload of VDPs and a handful of acquaintances. And apart from my wife, I had not one replenishing relationship. And there was a guy that I knew that was similar to me. We thought similarly. We kind of were in the same vein, and both of us kind of rebellious people. And Judy, it's embarrassing to admit it, But I took him to lunch and asked him if he wanted to be a friend. Do you want to try this out? It was like asking a guy out on a date, saying, do you want to be my best friend? Not saying, let's just check it out and see what happens. Well, here we are. That was in 87 or so. So, we're looking at, I can't count the years. What is that, 30 years, 35 years, something like that.
Too many, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of years, and we're still best friends. But it took a conscious choice. It took an effort, and I want to talk about that later in the show. But I think. Do you think our trouble with friendships, the problems we have with friendships, are cultural? Do you think it's more of an American phenomenon than it is a phenomenon worldwide?
I think it's very much an American problem, but I also do think it's worldwide.
Yeah.
It's just spreading. It's interesting how you described how you kind of felt weird saying, "Hey, you want to be my friend?"
Yeah,
Similar thing when I met Lucille. I'd interviewed her, and then I had asked to go back. I just wanted to spend more time with her. I asked to go back to ask her a few more questions, and I write about this in the book, and I get there, and pretty soon it's very obvious that I didn't have any questions. I didn't prepare anything. And she reached across the table, and she put her hand on my arm, and she said, Judy, you don't have to have a reason to come visit me. That was such a powerful statement. I'll never forget it. I think as a society, like you said, that we have gotten to where everything has to have a purpose. Everything has to have a meaning. We have to be going there to get something and looking out for what's in it for me or what have you. Almost like a salesmanship mentality that we've moved away from being able to just be together as human beings.
Yeah, it's become very transactional, hasn't it?
It has. That's exactly it. Transactional. That's exactly what it's become.
That's too bad. I think my wife and I have to admit, are very poor at, we have friends, but we don't get together regularly with friends. That's just because we're, like everybody else in our sort of culture group are so, we're working, we're invested in different projects, and we just don't have time, and then we're too tired. And I think, maybe that's why these retirement facilities are being so popular, because it gives people an opportunity to make friends, spend time with people, rather than being all alone in their house, just seeing their kids on occasion.
There's an interesting thing that goes along with what you're saying that we saw during the pandemic, and that is people who had moved into these retirement communities or independent living centers where they had their own apartment. They could either, eat in their own kitchen, or they could go down and have meals with people, but they had activities to go to. Soon as we started putting them behind the closed doors and saying, okay, you can't come out, you can't hang out, we got to all stay separated, we saw a massive amount of people move from an independent living situation where they were thriving to suddenly needing assisted living or going to nursing homes. Part of that, and a lot of that, goes along with the failure to thrive theory. If you look back at the research about those Romanian orphanages where they had these babies and they weren't growing, they weren't developing, they were feeding them, they were doing everything, and then somebody got this great idea and said, maybe we should touch them and pick them up, and maybe that's the problem, is we're not holding them, and there was no human connection. Soon as they started picking the babies up, rocking them, holding them, talking to them, the babies started thriving. They started gaining weight. They got stronger. They hit the milestones that they should have been hitting. I believe that is important at any age. And that's why shut-ins, even before the pandemic, had really low health rates. Their health would deteriorate so quickly as opposed to people who had friends, like we were talking about, or who were in social situations or had hobbies and were exposed to family members. The grandkids come over. The more we can interact as a society, the healthier we will be. They did some studies during the pandemic as well on how the brain interprets people like via Zoom and what lights up in the brain when we're only looking at 2D images. It's very, very different inside the brain, what's going on, versus when you're in a space with somebody and you're interacting with them and there's a 3D picture of them, so to speak, or they're there, you're seeing them visually in 3D, and they're in your space, meaning they're within 6 feet of you. This research is really incredible, and it really goes back to that failure to thrive or the ability to thrive. It proves that we need each other and not just on a computer screen.
Boy, I'm so agreement. I even today I struggle with Zoom. Many times I just say, I don't need to Zoom. Can we just talk on the phone? Seeing your face doesn't. It's easier to talk on the phone rather than Zoom to me, because that doesn't.
Well, there's a reason for that.
You're going to tell me there's something wrong with me?
No, not at all. This is some research that they did about these Zoom work from home and all these virtual meetings. It showed that when we're in virtual meetings where we're seeing our own image, we're seeing other people's image, and we're having to focus where our eyes are, where the camera is, we're worried about our surroundings, we're worried about the way we look. It is so taxing to the brain that people that were working from home, that were in these virtual kind of situations, and these kids especially that were in virtual classrooms where they had to constantly be on using all of their brain and worrying about all those things, how do I look, what's going on in my environment, what's going on behind so-and-so's environment, that they actually were exhausted so much sooner, and the productivity would go down just simply because there was so much going on. So many parts of their brain were being activated. For the kids, it wasn't just about learning. It was about all that other stuff that goes on mentally. And for the adults, it was trying to, am I sitting up straight? Am I looking here? Am I looking in the right place? And what I'm saying, because I'm watching myself speak, and do I sound okay? Do I sound stupid? Do I sound smart? It's exhausting. And they found that, like you said, just picking up the phone and having a conversation, we can focus on the words. We can listen to each other, focus on the words without all that other distraction, all the other clutter in the background.
That is fascinating. I've not heard that, but as you describe it, it sounds so true, because when I am on Zoom, my mind, I've got 40% of my mind on our conversation and 60% of my mind on peripheral crap, that doesn't mean anything. Now, that's not like that's untrue with personal interaction, but we've adjusted to that and become, we know how to react to that. That's life. That's the way life works. But when I'm not so necessarily focused on myself on Zoom, I can be more focused on myself than I should be. How am I coming off? How am I looking? How am I sounding? That's a great observation.
I definitely think it is, because I believe that we didn't really appreciate the brain taxation until we were way deep into this. We started saying, how come the kids aren't thriving in school? How come we're seeing the antidepressants prescriptions go up? Why are we seeing people not wanting to work and having trouble going back into the office? Because parts of the brain have just become exhausted. There was an article I wrote in the middle of the pandemic, And it was focused on how many decisions we had to make all the time, and decision fatigue. And even working from home created new problems with decision fatigue. Because not
decisions to what? I'm not catching it.
Fatigue.
Okay. Decision fatigue. Yes, got it.
Just exhausted from all the decisions.
Yes, exhaustion.
And when we were working from home, it was even worse because it wasn't just, okay, I'm going to go to the office, I'm going to go with my computer, and I'm going to focus on this. When we're at home, the decision fatigue is, I can probably get up and do a load of laundry in between these two calls. I need to go feed the animal. Maybe this is a good time to go for a walk. I really want to watch this show. It comes on at 3. And all of a sudden, we're out of our element of just being highly focused on the task at hand so that later we can enjoy all those non-work things. And we're having to make decision on things that we don't even realize we're making decisions on.
And you said you wrote on that? Is that what you said you wrote on?
I did. I wrote an article called Decision Fatigue.
Will you, let's just remember after the show for you to send me a link to that. I'd like to put a link to that on the show notes because I think that's really powerful. I want to move a little bit, but I'm still on friendships. But I do have something that you had brought up in our conversation, and everybody knows that I have a pre-conversation with my guests, and after our conversation, I was thinking about it, and it seems to me that maybe I don't know if it's always been this way or if this is a new thing, but this is a problematic thing, and that is we become very tribal in our gathering of friends, and that we tend only to associate with people like ourselves, with our same values, our same views of life, and I fear that limits our thinking to a very narrow worldview, and I have a feeling you agree with that you kind of led me down that path. What do you think?
I absolutely couldn't agree more with you. We grow when we're stretched, and the whole us four no more shut the door theory is going to be the demise of us as humans, because we need to be stretched. We need to learn. We need to have a conversation. I have said before, and maybe I said this in our conversation, that my 50-year-old self would not agree with my 20-year-old self.
Yeah.
And my 20-year-old self certainly wouldn't agree with my 50-year-old self. So within our own lives, within our own life experiences, we have times where we're not even in alignment with our own beliefs. So to expect that we only need to have or should have friends that agree with us is not just shallow, it's ignorant, because we won't grow unless we're really stepping outside of the box. And it doesn't mean that you have to say, I'm going to go have a friend that's completely on the other side of the aisle in every single, thing politically and morally and all those things that we get all worked up about. And I'm going to change and I'm going to believe everything they believe. We don't need that. We don't need that one-sided, everyone has to agree with this ideology, or they're wrong, or they're bad, or. We need to be able to have real conversations. And it was real conversations that are what our country is based on.
Do you think we had a day where we had that, Judy? Do you think there was a day when we were more open to conversation than we are now? Well, I mean, forget now. I mean, now there is no such thing as conversation. There's vitriol and dismissiveness,
even within families.
Oh, I know. Tell me, I know. And just so what you do is within families, you learn not to talk about it. But I'm one of those strange people that I want to know both sides, so I jokingly say I subscribe to the conservative rag, the National Review, and the commie rag, the Atlantic magazine, and I read both of them. But they're completely opposite points of view, but I get an idea of at least where others are coming from, because I really don't fit in either place. I fit in both places. I'm an issue-oriented more than a party-oriented person. But it's nice to know the arguments of somebody that disagrees with me. And many times, you said my 50-year-old self doesn't agree with my 20-year-old self. Well, myself today quite often doesn't agree with myself of 2 months ago. If I get more data, then I'm going to change my mind.
Yes, and that's the hallmark of a mature individual. And I don't mean by age. I'm not calling you old. I'm referring to emotional intelligence. Having emotional intelligence is allowing yourself to see all sides of an issue and come to a conclusion that's your conclusion. It isn't a conclusion that you're parroting somebody else, that you're just jumping in on someone else's words and opinions. And really, I believe that we've stepped away from allowing ourselves to have individual opinions. It's not about taking sides. It's about forming an individual opinion. And if we can get back to fact-based, just give me the facts, give me both sides of the story, then let me form my own opinion.
And it doesn't mean that everybody has to agree with me, that my opinion, just because it's my opinion, doesn't mean that, I have to hold anger if somebody doesn't agree with me. Well, I'll tell you what I want to do, Judy, is I want to take a break because I want to go to Lucille Taught You lessons about the power of perspective, and those are the two things I wanted to talk about in our show was friendship, that I think we've covered pretty well, and I want to talk about the power of perspective, which I think I'm going to like even more. But let's take a break and then we will come right to that. Is that okay?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you are listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and we are having a treat today with Judy Gaman, who is kind of the expert at life, the universe, and everything. And she spent a lot of time with centenarians, with people over 100, and learned many things of life. Now, we just covered in the first half of the show, we discussed friendships. But Lucille, Judy's special centenarian friend, who died, 4 days before she turned 104?
Yeah, just 2 weeks shy of her 104th birthday.
2 weeks before her 104th birthday. But she also caused you to think more about the power of perspective. And I know this is sort of related to what we've already discussed, but I think it's an essential topic, and that you told me that you believe we see life through the lens of our own perspective. I so agree, and I think it was Anais Nin who wrote something like, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. And that is, and so there's a narrow and a wider perspective into who we are, and the ability to accept that. Talk to me about that, about seeing life through the lens of your own perspective.
Well, our own perspective comes from our own life's experience. And no two people, even two twins growing up in the same household, will have identical experiences. They might have identical genetics, but they're not going to have identical experiences. How we experience the world, the things that happen to us, the people that come into our lives, all of those experiences form our lens that we see the world, or our perspective from which we see the world. If you look at like a perspective drawing that an architect would draw, and they draw the room from one angle, and they draw the room from the other angle, it may look like a very different space. That is why we can't all agree completely, because we're not all looking at the same thing. We're all looking at that room of life through our own perspective.
It is. I was thinking that perspective, you talked about it as a lot of it is experience, our personal histories, and that so perspective is learned largely unintentionally. But can't we make perspective a matter of choice? Can't I choose to think more widely? Can't I choose to broaden my perspective?
I believe you can, but I don't believe you can broaden your perspective without broadening your experiences.
Right, I agree.
So you could say, I want to be more understanding, or I want to be, more well-versed in this particular issue. Unless you experience something that changes your perspective, it's just a want. It's just a desire to see things differently. We have to see things differently because we had that different experience. I think I shared with you on our call that this was a good example. And I have a very dear friend, like almost a sister to me, and she's African American. And during the Black Lives Matter movement, she and I were having a conversation over lunch, and she said, "Judy, you have no idea what it's like to be discriminated against." And I was really taken back by that. I was a young child. I was 10 years old when I moved from Detroit to small town Texas. And I had a teacher who was, she was silver haired. She had to have been pushing 80, who was very unhappy that I was a Yankee with a U-Haul, her words exactly. And I read about that experience. I read about that experience in the book, Love, Life, and Lucille, and how that kind of framed my life. But then later in life, now it's no secret that people who know me really well know I'm okay with sharing my height. I'm only 5 foot on my driver's license. I fudged that inch. So being of short stature has brought on some unique things as an adult. Now, my mother, who has recently passed away, never told me I was short. She never told me I couldn't do things. I mean, goodness, she signed me up for basketball. I don't know what she was thinking, but she always thought that I could go and do and be whatever I desired to go and do and be. And because she instilled that in me, I fully believe that. So I grew with a lot of confidence to be able to be me. And I was sitting in a meeting, a very important meeting, a long boardroom table, with me with some engineers and architects, and one of the gentlemen was late, and it was a bit of a heated discussion. I had to bring up some topics and tell him I was pretty disappointed at some things that had gone on and things we need to fix. And halfway through this very large gentleman comes in. He's tall in stature, broad shoulders, sits down, and by the end, about an hour later, things got fixed. I got what I needed to get out of the meeting, and we all came to an understanding. But afterwards, I stood up and I was shaking hands, and the gentleman who entered late walked over to me, patted me on the head, and said, literally patted me on the head like a child.
Oh,
said,
no.
"Well, had I known you were so small, I certainly wouldn't have been, so short, I certainly wouldn't have been so intimidated by you." Now, it was the first time anybody called me short, like in like a bad way. Like, I took it as a bad way. I know in our exchange before, you thought, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe there's more of that conversation that that maybe I filtered out simply because I couldn't believe I was patted on the head.
Well, that is a pretty demeaning thing, to pat you on the head. Wasn't that was cute?
Yeah, nice job, honey. but I think in our own experiences, we have had these ways of being discriminated against, these ways of being feeling less than, and they look different for everybody. And sometimes that's because people have had a parent that has put them down, or a teacher that has put them down, or they just never felt that they themselves had enough confidence in themselves. So there's a lot of things that we all deal with. And don't ever discount, just like I couldn't discount my friend's experience, don't ever discount your own or other people's experiences, because you haven't walked in the shoes, you haven't lived through their lens, you haven't seen the world through their perspective. Be very mindful of that, and I think that'll go a long way in the business world, in your friendships, in your family, all of those places.
Yeah, you're alluding to something that is so right, and that is so common, and that is the negative voice that we have, that perspective that we are somehow less than, and it just impacts the way that we view life, that we see life. Something that I was talking about making, because I'm really big into choice, Judy. I think a lot of life is, not all of it, but a lot of life is choice. That we can make choices that are good choices that can help us, and I think perspective can be a matter of choice. And one of the things that I am, as my listeners know, I'm very deeply into late medieval Christian mysticism. So it's it's 1000 AD to 1500. 1500 AD, or I guess they call it BCE. No, they call it CE, the Common Era. But there's something about perspective and self-reflection, silence, that's an unknown activity in our culture, and that is that time of silence, contemplation, reflection, and just self-reflection. What are my thoughts on something? What do I believe? Or journaling. We can do life. We can let life do us, or we can do life. And I think self-reflection and making these choices are that we're doing life rather than allowing life to do us. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, there's a phrase that I hear a lot and use a lot, and that is free agency. We have the ability to make our own choices, which also means that we live with our own consequences from those choices. I think that's important. One thing you said about being in silence and the importance of silence is, in today's world, we almost view silence as uncomfortable.
Not almost. It's not. We do view it as uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. We're used to the dings of the phone and the constant interruptions, and everywhere we turn, we've got an email going off, or our phone's going off, or breaking news. By the way, everything's breaking news these days. I remember when it would say breaking news, and everyone would rush around the television because something really big has happened. But now we're almost to the point where we don't even get adrenaline rushes anymore, because everything is always an emergency. And it's all about gaining and keeping our attention on whoever or whatever these forces are that want our attention, whether it's media or it's marketing or what have you. The functional MRI has really revolutionized things that we know about the brain. And what we now know about the brain is, when we are in prayer or meditation, there are parts of the brain that light up that don't light up any other time.
Really?
Except when you're in prayer or you're in meditation. So there is so much to be said about just being still and having, whether that's a conversation with God or your own thoughts, allowing your own thoughts to kind of interrupt your life. It used to be that life interrupted your thoughts, and we've somewhere along the line reversed that, and we need to get away from it being so uncomfortable to be silent. We need to welcome the silence. And even in the scripture it says, be still and know that I am. Well, be still. That's the important part. Be still. How hard is it for us to be still? It's something we don't want to do, or we feel unproductive. So maybe the uncomfortableness is, if I'm not doing something, I'm not worth whatever, because I'm not producing whatever.
That's so well said.
Thank you. As we kind of look at our lives, and I really want to challenge all of your listeners, as you look at your life, at the end of the day, think about how much time did you have that you weren't listening to somebody else's ideas, or getting on your phone, or getting on Wordle, or whatever it is that we all do these days, but you were just quiet. And if you find that this time doesn't exist, or maybe there wasn't any, or maybe there was once a week, start doing things like you mentioned, journaling. Journaling's huge. It's so important. It's the brain dump, which allows people to sleep at night. And start journaling, whether that's journaling your thoughts, journaling,
or just rambling journaling, just whatever's coming to your mind, just ramble it out, and it will turn into something. It's a strange process.
It is a very good process. We tell our patients that executive medicine of Texas, we see a lot of executives, people that are traveling a lot because of work, or they're just bogged down with a lot of stressors. Sometimes they own their own businesses, and we really encourage them to journal, or prayer journal, or whatever they want to call it, before they go to bed.
Sure.
Because if you get it out of your brain, you're gonna sleep better. Your brain's gonna let you sleep.
Yes. Okay, look, we're nearing time, but I am dying to ask you a question. So it's related to friendships and perspective. But you said something as a medical expert. You said, as a health specialist, you advocate that friendships and perspective have a huge impact on our health. Now, I have no idea what you meant by that, but I'm really curious. Can you sort of briefly get me up to speed on how friendships and perspective are advantage to my health?
Certainly. Well, let's start with friendships. So friendships are important to your health for many reasons. But what we may not understand is that when we spend time with other people, we actually have chemical reactions in our own body. When we are laughing, we're releasing happy hormones. Those happy hormones are related to longevity. So it's so important that we have those friendships and we have those experiences. And even sharing the ups and downs of life reduces our stress levels. And reducing stress will reduce your chances of heart disease and cancers and diabetes, because when we have increased stress and we're in situations where we feel like the whole weight of the world is on our shoulders, and there's really, we've got to solve all these problems by ourselves, we create this storm of inflammation, chronic inflammation within our bodies. And that is the root of all of these chronic diseases, is this inflammatory state. So having friendships and spending time with other people, laughing and enjoying life and having downtime, that is going to reduce inflammation. So super important. And then when it comes to perspective and health, it's really about the term worry. What is worry? Worry is just another word for stress. So when we worry, we maybe lose sleep. Well, I mentioned earlier about a functional MRI. Another thing that we learned about the brain is that when we go into a deep sleep, and as we go into sleep, our brain cycles through the sleep cycle, and we want to get into that deep REM sleep, that rapid eye movement.
Right.
But every time we go to sleep, we go into the first cycle, but as those cycles go through, they last longer. We now know that the brain washes itself like a washing machine, and it clears out all those plaques and things. So if we're under tremendous stress because we don't have perspective, real good perspective on the fact we're going to get through it, whatever it is, we're going to get through it. If we don't have that, and then we aren't sleeping well, we're increasing our risk for dementia, Alzheimer's, stroke, all of these things. So if we talk about longevity and we say, what are things we can do right now to help ourselves live longer, healthier lives, not just more years, but good years, that is, have friends, hang out with them, enjoy life, make it a good focus in your life, and then find ways to have perspective. And sometimes those two go hand in hand because your friends will help you gain perspective.
Right, of course. I love that, and especially what I love that is you're not telling me that I have to go to a gym, and that I have to start popping health pills, and I have to, you're saying just live a more well-rounded life, live a life that involves other people, because we are created, I believe, we're created to be relational. We're not that the Creator is a very relational entity, and desires intimacy, and I think desires us to be intimate not only with the Creator but with other people, and it just makes perfect sense that this is a great move toward longevity. Judy Gaman, see, I did it, and you didn't correct me. Judy Gaman, you are amazing. It is so. We could talk for forever, but thank you so much for spending time on the show with me.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. And hang on afterward, and we'll chat, and we'll get a link to that article that people may want to read. I know I do. And again, thank you. So for our audience, that's all we have for today. This is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.